Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison.
My name is Brandon Bonner.
And we'll be your host. All right, Brandon, this is going to be an interesting topic today. We're going to talk about being single,
Which neither one of us are.
And we're also going to talk about, in part of that, the sexual desire and how that can be a struggle for single people and but married people too. I mean, we're gonna have an interesting conversation, I think, here. So I want to ground this with a passage of scripture that as right before the show we were reading this. It's probably one of the funnier passages of Scripture. So 1 Corinthians 7, beginning in verse 32, just listen. This is what Paul is writing, the Apostle Paul. He says, and he's talking about singleness. He says, I want you to be free from anxiety. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about the worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. So basically what Paul is saying here is if you're married, you don't have time to focus on God or the Lord as much because you're worried about your spouse and making them happy and having a peaceful household. But if you're not married, if you're single, you don't have to worry about that, right? It's you've got your full attention can be dedicated to the Lord. And certainly, that was Paul's argument later on for staying single. Mm-hmm. And he suggests, listen, it's my opinion here that it's better to just remain single if you can. But if your sexual desires overcome you, then you need to maybe think about getting hitched.
I'm going to clip that and send it to your wife.
So in this context, I think it's important to note that singleness is described as a gift. Rather than it's not a problem that needs to be fixed. And so I want to park right there for just a second, because in my ministry career, I've talked to many single people who are very anxious about being single. They're very worried about it. And I still know a lot of single people who are not married, and that is a source of great stress in their lives. And I understand the reasons why that might be, but I think in the context of this, looking at it as a way to have all of this time and resource to be focused on God, but that's easier said than done, right? So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I think that I haven't really looked at singleness as a gift, and we were having a study with someone and talking about 1 Corinthians 7. We talked about it for a while, mm-hmm. And once you start to unpack that, you can kind of see. And I'm not advocating, Lexi, if you're watching this, but you can kind of see like how that time of life, that season of life, could be a really big opportunity to really develop and grow that relationship with God and understand Him. And be able to focus solely on Him, which is, easier said than done, right? So, and I think that we put a lot of pressure, and I don't know if that's a church thing or if that's a culture thing. I think it's probably more of a church thing, but we put a lot of pressure on, who you're going to end up with. You're going to marry this person, and you guys need to get married, and when are you going to have kids? Like, there's a lot of pressure that I think builds up, and families, I think, can have an impact on that. Obviously, I would imagine if you're a parent and you have a grown kid that's of the married age, you want them to find someone and have companionship and all the things. So I think we put a lot of external pressures on that can heighten that anxiety of like, oh man, I need to find someone. that's the expectation, and I'm not going to be happy or fulfilled unless I do find someone.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because it's definitely, when you talk about singleness and it's like, oh, you're single? Wow, what a curse. Why is that? And we feed into that. The church feeds into that, and the church needs to stop looking at this as getting married as a spiritual graduation, because it's not. You can be just as spiritual, or to Paul's point, probably more spiritual if you do remain single. That is your relationship is with Christ, not with another person. And so he's a huge advocate of that. And we've conditioned people to have the expectation that they go to high school, they have a girlfriend or boyfriend. If they don't marry their high school sweetheart, they better for sure find somebody while they're in college. And then that's, in college, that's when the questions begin. The church members like, so you dating anybody? Oh, I can set you up with so-and-so. And if you happen to graduate college and still single, then it gets like it's DEFCON 10 at that point. And you have all the church ladies, trying to set you up with, they're on high alert at that point. And it's treated as this problem that needs to be fixed. And I know that there's nobody listening that can argue this point with me. Like, that's what we do. Your family probably does it. The church does it. Work does it. You're surrounded. If you're single, you're surrounded. If you're above the age of 24 and you're still single, you can probably relate to this. Everybody in your circle of influence, everybody that you know, is probably asking you about your dating life, and if do you plan to get married? Well, you need to, and why aren't you married yet? And I can't believe that you're still single. So those constant little, I hate to use this term, but like they're microaggressions, towards being single. And I think we're just doing a huge injustice, and we're perpetuating this myth that you have to get married or you're less than. You're incomplete. You're not completely fulfilled. And I get it. And now I'm going to, go back on the other side and defend the people because now I've offended a bunch of people who try to set other people up. So if you're some of the church ladies listening to this podcast, I promise you, I'm not getting after you here, because we do have God setting it up from creation for man and woman to be together. And he says it's not good for man to be alone. And so he creates this aspect of relational living. And so that's good and great. And I think that it should be, if you want to get married, should definitely be something that you pursue. But you also have to have a mindset that, maybe not. It might not happen for you. And so plan B is not a less than version. It's a pivot to something that can be just as rewarding.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think that marriage is a great thing, and something that, I don't want to obviously take away from that, but I feel like if we ease some of that pressure that creates that anxiety away from, like, if I'm going to date this person or go on a date with this person, I have to marry him.
Yeah.
And like, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And it almost ruins the whole, dating scene. Like, I was like, I don't want to date that person. I can't see myself marrying that. And I've heard that so many times of people coming and talking to me about, I don't know if I can marry this person.
Why do you have to?
Yeah, you haven't gone on a date with this person.
Yeah.
You don't even know who you want to marry yet. So I think that a lot of that anxiety can take away from dating. So,
and and I also, if you're not married, if you never get married, you don't have to worry about divorce. And I know that's a very pessimistic statement to say, but I can tell you from I do a lot of marriage counseling and premarital counseling that a lot of marriages end in divorce, and they end in divorce because marriage is hard. And I think viewed through the biblical lens, there's a reason why marriage is hard. It's about sacrifice. It's about elevating our base natures and mimicking the different things that Christ was. We are to love our wives as husbands, love our wives sacrificially. And Scripture even goes so far as to say, husbands, you are to love your wives as Christ loved the church, which is he gave his life for the church, so that it's sacrificially. And there's this whole submissive piece that, in today's culture, that's you don't talk about that, but there's this submissive piece for wives to submit to their husbands. And what do we find Christ doing? He submitted to the will of his Father. So marriage is this union where we, as men and women, can elevate ourselves from a spiritual standpoint by demonstrating the characteristics that Christ demonstrated for us. So, and that's hard, and that's why a lot of marriages fails, because that's a hard thing to do. But if you do it and you do it right, there's great reward from that. And being single has its own set of circumstances that are a struggle. You know, the sexual desire piece of it, and God has created sex to be confined within marriages, and so, you know, how does that get handled? And so there's this challenge there that's something that is sacrificially given up, and it could be for, you know, for your entire life because you never get married, or it could be greatly delayed because you don't get married until much later on in life. And so there's another, you know, set of unique circumstances there. But it's interesting when I read this, what Paul wrote and why he wrote that. You know for a fact that he was dealing with married men who were completely distracted. He probably was trying to have conversations with them about how they needed to be living, and they were like, yeah, but the missus said that I have to be, you know, it's like, look, you know, your wife is important, but God is more important.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and kind of leading into sexual desire. Next point here is sexual desire is good, but must be governed. Read James 1, verse 14 and 15, which states, "But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death." You know, that's something I think, and this is kind of leaning a little bit into culture. You know, we have, I think, as a society, this has become like, you know, sexual sin, sexual desire, falling into sexual desire has become a lot more prevalent, maybe appropriate, like hookup. Yeah. I'm thinking like hookup culture, yeah. and I mean, we talked about this last night too, but you know, media, what is appropriate in terms of like what's on movies and TV shows. I mean, it's just a lot more graphic than it used to be.
And we're going to talk about that in our next episode, more about the hyper-sexualized culture that we're living in.
Yeah. But, you know, I think all those things can bring forth temptation. And we know that, you know, sexual desire, it's a piece of God's good creation.
Right.
But it's also a feeling that's not meant to be authoritative. So because we have this desire, we still have to have control over it. You know, think about the fruit of the Spirit. You know, self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. We're not repressing those feelings, but we're controlling those feelings of desire.
Yeah, you know, and just to break this down into some very simplistic terms, you know, when you think about, because this is the one that I think a lot of people struggle with. It's like, if I'm not married, I can't have sex. And while that's true, well, they can have sex, but you know, that's outside of scriptural guidance on that. We need to think about this in terms of what is it that you're focused on, because the things that you dwell on, the things that you focus on, are the things that you're going to end up doing. And so if you allow your mind to be focused on things of a sexual nature, you're probably going to go down that road, and you're going to slip up, and you're going to pursue those feelings. And what I say to people when I do counsel, especially with single people, I say your one specific body part should not define who you are as a person. Like that's a base elemental type of thing. Like, you don't have to have sex to exist, to live. Mm-hmm. It's a gift that God has given us that is supposed to be exercised in a very specific set of circumstances. And like food, on the other hand, that's something that you have to have. But sex is not, it's not a necessity of life. And so despite what people think, especially younger people, because there's, you know, a lot more hormones and thing, sex is not the end all be all of the world. And if you dedicate your energy and your passions to other things that are not body parts, you find that it's easier and easier to pull away from that urge, those desires to do that. And that's what Paul's getting at here. He's saying, you know, when you begin to focus on other things that are on higher level things, not things that are rooted in the amygdala, you know, you're moving to the prefrontal cortex of existence. not only is life manageable as far as repressing those sexual urges, but it can be extremely fulfilling as well.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's important for us to, recognize that us engaging in sexual sin is causing spiritual damage. It's pulling us away from our Creator, and I feel like we've gotten really, as a society, maybe my generation, I'm not sure, but we've gotten kind of casual. Like it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's just
Did you mention the hookup culture?
yeah.
Yeah.
Having sex is not that big of a deal. It's
Right.
not a big commitment. It's a lot more casual, which I think with your generation that probably was not the case.
It was getting there. But definitely the generations that followed, it might as well be a handshake.
Yeah.
I mean, just for what it actually means. And that's bad.
Right.
That's really, really bad.
And you've even evolved, I think, over the since COVID with some of these platforms that have come out, where you're subscribing to see explicit content, and how that's really skyrocket. I mean, there's industries built on that now, and that's I mean, I guess they've always been built on that, but now it's just maybe even more accessible, and that's that can cause us spiritual damage and pull us away from our Creator, and then even skew our view of what that relationship is supposed to look like in a marriage setting.
And along those lines, and this gets to the next point here, is this autonomy that we all feel like we have to have. That we are these. And this is something that's come up before, talking about how culture how culture presses this thing of self-identity and self-worth, and so this autonomous nature that we have, we're our own little God. We define who we want, what we want, when we want, and so the sexuality piece of that is it's going to fall right into place with them, and that's, I think, part of the reason why it's so hard for single people to separate out this push by culture that's telling them, you should take what you want. If it feels good, you should do it. And being able to pull back from that and look at that from a spiritual standpoint and say, no, I don't get to dictate everything about my life, because there's some things that I'm going to allow God to dictate, because I'm created in His image. I'm not created in the world's image. And so that redefines who we are. And when we redefine who we are, we redefine by extension the types of activities that we participate in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, this is not new, right? Like, Paul's writing letters to the church in Corinth because they were dealing with these specific issues, same issues that we're dealing with today. Yep. They were just doing whatever they wanted to and however they wanted to. But it is funny because it, from a culture standpoint, it's like, hey, you have freedom. You can do this stuff.
Yeah.
But to be set free from sin, which is what Paul was trying to articulate, you are free from this sin, free from this bondage. That's the true freedom.
Yeah.
But you don't need this or have to have this to go on, to live life. Like you that's not something that's going to pull you away. It's not a crutch you have to lean on. Like, you have true freedom from this, so that you can have a fulfilling life with your Creator. And I think that that's something that we maybe could talk about more. Is culture defines, and you talked about, culture defines this as being free, but from a spiritual standpoint, not being held captive to that sin is actually a lot more freeing.
Yeah, it's really ironic when you stop and think about it. The culture today pushes this idea that you are free when you do what you want, but doing what you want, if we look at this for truly what it was, we peel back the layer, we see the ruin and destruction and addiction that this hyper-sexualized culture is living in. And I'm sorry to say, that's not freedom. Those are chains. And so it's like the world's trying to sell you while you're chained up on this idea that, keep doing the very thing that are locking you down with those chains, because that's freedom. And it's not at all. And Paul knew this, Jesus knew this, God knew this. Is why He put these parameters in place, because we only find true freedom through Christ.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's demonstrated over and over again.
Yep.
Talk about loneliness.
Yeah. So next point, loneliness is real. Community is essential. Um, I think this is a big one, and I've talked a lot about the importance of church community. Just having a romantic relationship is not the cure for loneliness, and I'm sure you've seen this in your counseling. Like, in fact, if that's your approach to I'm going in this relationship because I don't want to be lonely, that's probably not going to work out well, right?
Yeah.
Codependency and not being independent. I mean, it's not a cure for loneliness. So what's your experience with that as you've done some counseling?
Yeah, it's absolutely. I get couples that come in and they talk about their marriage not being satisfactory anymore, and the term I actually hear is I'm all alone because he's not romantic, and so I feel like I'm all alone anymore, and so we have to redefine what that actually looks like. What is it about the romance piece of that determines whether or not you feel lonely or not? Because I would argue that there's a lot of other things, a lot of different components that go into that. So, couples that get married because they're lonely and they think romance is going to be the cure for that loneliness, I tell them you're setting yourselves up for failure. This marriage is not going to last because if that's what you think, you're wrong. And just go talk to anybody that's been married for more than 10 years, and they're going to tell you, no, that like passion and all of that excitement and everything that's there at the beginning, that lustful love kind of stuff, that doesn't last very long in marriages. Mm-hmm. After you get through a couple of years and that fades away, then you begin the work of what it means to truly love another person.
Yep.
And that takes work, and it takes a lot of energy. And you're, again, back to Paul's point, you're working to make that relationship work. And while sex is an important component of that, it's not the component of that.
Yep. Yep. And I think, again, looking at community and the church's responsibility, thinking about Hebrews 10:24, don't forsake the assembly, like come together, be with your spiritual family, I think is an important, don't silo yourself off, because the truth is, we all have sin and struggles and temptations and desires. And if we don't have a church community, if we don't have, and I'm not saying like, I have to go talk to everyone in our congregation about my struggles, but I have a group of folks that I can lean on and talk through inside the marriage. When Lexi and I have had issues, you and I, you've counseled me through some of those things and helped me kind of look at things differently and be a better husband or whatever it might be. That's all church community, having relationships, deep friendships in the church to be able to kind of navigate these things, right? God did not design us to be alone.
Right.
And so I think it's important for us to seek those relationships inside the church.
Yeah, Betsy, my wife and I were talking just the other day about this, about how cool it is. Looking at the setup, I'm going to talk a little bit about the compound. If you know my family, you know what the compound is. But we've kind of fallen into this place. It wasn't really intentional or purposeful, but we now all kind of live very close to each other. We've got a place behind our house where I've got my son and his wife living, and right next to them is a former student ambassador and his wife, and all are members here at the church. And then next to me is you and Lexi, and then I can probably throw a stone a couple times and hit the house where my daughter and her husband live. So we all are in this very close proximity, and it's cool to see you guys like lean on each other and have this really tight-knit community and interact with each other. And so back to Betsy and I were talking about this. We didn't have that. Like, that would have been really cool to have our closest friends be just right there. And, knowing that you guys are doing Bible studies during the week, and it's just so incredible. And it gets to the heart of what we're talking about here is that community, church community, close ties with friends. That is the answer to loneliness blended in with a relationship with Christ. You bring those two things together, and you're not going to be lonely.
Absolutely.
Yep. So this last point here, our ultimate hope is bigger than romance. This is super interesting to me because when you read the eschatological piece of Scripture, so end times, and then this picture of heaven and the description of heaven, I find it fascinating that we are not married in heaven. And there's probably, Betsy's listening to this, she's like, hallelujah. Lexi's like, yeah, whew, thank goodness. All the wives, I think I heard a collective like, yeah. But isn't that cool? Isn't that like so fascinating to me that we're not given in marriage in heaven, that it's temporary. Yep. It's here. And so you have to step back and ask why. And it gets back to this first point. So for you single people listening in that are all bummed out about being single, listen, marriage is a test. Marriage is hard. It can be great, but I can tell you that there's a lot of stress that comes with marriage that single people do not have. And if it was just the greatest thing on earth, why wouldn't it continue in heaven? I mean, because heaven is supposed to be the perfect place, right? And marriage doesn't exist in heaven.
Yep.
So that should tell you something right there about, just how your thought process needs to be when you think about you've been stuck as a single person here on earth, and that's just the worst thing that could ever happen to you.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think it's, again, it puts in perspective. Marriage is an earthly union, and it does teach you a lot about the relationship that Christ has with the church, because that is exactly the reflection of what a marriage should be, right? The husband is the head of the marriage as Christ was the head, and,
right.
and the wife's the church, and Christ sacrificially loved the church and died for the church, and as husbands we should be willing and do the same. So I think it gives you a deeper, more intimate understanding of that relationship, but also it's like, hey, when we're in heaven, things are going to be so incredible that you don't need this earthly union anymore.
Right.
Your hope is built on something so much greater, and that being Christ.
Yeah, we're married to Christ at that point. Yep. So if you had to do it, were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, like, if you had to do it over again, would you get married?
Absolutely. No, marriage is a great thing. Like, I don't want us to sit on here and be like, no, don't get married, because I think that's an important thing. Families and having kids is a component of that too. I think marriage is a beautiful thing, and it's been great for Lexi and I. It's been a challenge. I mean, it's I think maybe year 2, year 3 is kind of when I had a moment of like, this requires work. You can't just put this on autopilot, because if you just put this on autopilot, it degrades because you're not actually contributing. And I think that was actually maybe a conversation that we had. So I'll ask you the question: would you do it?
I would. I would do a lot of things differently. I mean,
would you still marry Betsy?
I would. I see. Here's the problem, Brendan. I'm a slow learner, and there's some things that you do in life that you can't go back and fix. And so there's things that I've done in my marriage that have been really harmful to our relationship, and it's things that we continue, or I continue to try to work on, and salvage is not the right word, but just create a more perfect union. Is that in the Constitution? Is that the preamble? The preamble?
I think so.
Some history person would know that. Yeah, to create a more perfect union. But that's what it is about. It's the daily struggle to create a perfect union. And I'm never going to attain that, because I'm flawed and I do incredibly stupid things, and I'm selfish, and I want to do things my way, and it's a lot of work. And if you're a lazy person and you're inclined to just sitting back, marriage is going to be really, really hard for you. Yep. So. Good discussion on this. I enjoyed
me too.
talking about it. I got a little bit uncomfortable there for a minute. So, will you shout out the sponsors for us?
Yeah. So, check out, well, first off, we're on all the major platforms. So YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, definitely check us out. Also want to shout out Ministry League. Ministry League's a great application, a great tool, has a ton of resources. So if you're involved in church leadership or if you're a church member or anything in between, I think it's a great resource. There's some good stuff on there, and our podcast is on there, so that's a plus. Obviously, Central Church of Christ and the studio here. This has been a great experience for us to be able to record in this super nice spot. And then finally, our other podcast that's filmed in the studio, which is Digging Deeper.
It's a good podcast.
Good podcast.
Yeah.
A brief summary of the lesson on Sunday. So I encourage you to check that out.
Yeah. Until our next episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, be kind to one another, love one another. Remember, the Creator of the universe loves you so much that He gave up His only Son for you. Have a blessed day.